More than 15 years after the golden era of muscle cars had faded in the United States, horsepower was once again on the rise. By 1987, the Corvette's 350 cubic inch V8 had climbed from 200 horsepower in 1982 to 245, while the Ferrari Testarossa was approaching the 390 horsepower mark with its flat 12 engine. Performance was making a comeback. However, muscle cars were still far from reaching the power levels of their legendary late 1960s predecessors, except for one car. While GM was struggling to push past 250 horsepower with their 5.7-liter V8s, another automaker was quietly crafting one of the most unexpected luxury muscle cars of all time. With a naturally aspirated 5.3-liter V8 churning out a staggering 430 horsepower, it was the most powerful factory-built V8 car of its era. And surprisingly, it didn't come from the Big Three, or even from the United States. Instead, over 3,000 miles across the Atlantic, Aston Martin was creating a masterpiece of old-school performance. The car was simply known as the V8 Vantage X-Pack, a model with roots dating back to 1967. In the years leading up to this, Aston Martin had skyrocketed in popularity, largely thanks to its association with the one and only James Bond. The DB5 had become an icon just a few years earlier. However, both the DB5 and DB6 were evolutions of the aging DB4 platform, and it was becoming clear that this design was outdated and too compact for the ever-evolving Grand Touring segment. As a result, Aston Martin made the decision to completely redesign its flagship model from the ground up. By 1967, the Aston Martin DBS was born, bringing more speed, luxury, and space than its predecessor. It was a true gentleman's car, as any Aston should be, but this one had an edge. The design was wider, more aggressive, and carried itself with a commanding presence on the road. It had attitude, yet despite its muscular stance, its aluminum body was still hand-formed and meticulously assembled like other Aston Martins. In fact, it's believed that the quarter-panel design of the DBS was heavily inspired by American muscle cars of the 1960s, while its squared-off front end and wide grille gave it a distinctly aggressive look, more muscle than opulence. That was fitting because this new DBS had been designed to house Aston Martin's first-ever V8 engine, a 5.3-liter aluminum dual overhead cam masterpiece crafted by Tadek Marek, Aston Martin's Polish engineering genius. However, ensuring the engine was perfected took longer than expected, which meant the initial DBS models were instead equipped with the old DB6's inline-six engine. It wasn't until 1969 that the long-awaited V8 finally found its way into production models. Despite its smooth power delivery and respectable 280 horsepower, the inline-six lacked the punch this body style deserved. But when the new Aston Martin 5.8 finally arrived, it delivered an impressive 360 horsepower thanks to a Bosch fuel injection system. Power-wise, this put it on par with the highest-performing American V8s of the era, which was no small feat for Aston Martin's first V8 attempt. The engine also produced 360 pound-feet of torque at 4,500 RPM, giving the car exceptional mid-range power. With a newly designed chassis featuring a de Dion rear axle, ventilated disc brakes, and an optional 5-speed manual transmission, the DBS V8 launched Aston Martin into the next decade. It could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 6 seconds and reach a top speed of 160 miles per hour, thanks to its 5-speed gearbox and 3.54-to-1 rear differential. A 3-speed automatic transmission was also available, but it significantly hindered performance. The manual was the way to go. However, the advanced Bosch fuel injection system proved to be a headache, causing so many issues that Aston Martin eventually reverted later models back to a carbureted setup. They would later refine the system, but for a while, carburetors remained the preferred choice. Visually, the DBS VE8 retained its design until 1973, when a refreshed version debuted. These Series 2 models, now simply called the Aston Martin V8 rather than DBS V8, received a revised front fascia that replaced the quad headlight setup and flat grille with a more refined single headlight design and a split grille. In my opinion, this facelift gave the car a much cleaner and more elegant look. By 1973, power had dropped to 310 horsepower due to tightening emissions regulations, and throughout the mid-1970s, it continued to decline, dipping into the mid-200s. In response, Aston Martin introduced a Stage 1 engine package that brought output back up to 305 horsepower with revised camshafts and a reworked exhaust system. Then, in 1977, the Aston Martin V8 took a dramatic leap forward with the introduction of the V8 Vantage, the ultimate high-performance version of the model. Featuring a new front-end design with a blocked-off grille, a more pronounced hood bulge, and 2 large fog lamps, it looked more aggressive than ever. Under the hood, the upgrades were just as significant. The carburetors were upgraded to larger 48mm IDF Webers, mounted on revised intake manifolds, and the engine received larger valves, modified exhaust manifolds, high-lift camshafts, and increased compression. These enhancements pushed output to around 380 horsepower, though Aston Martin modestly referred to it as merely adequate. The V8 Vantage's suspension also received major upgrades, including adjustable Koni dampers, shorter springs, and a thicker anti-roll bar, along with wider tires for improved grip. The interior was also refined with higher quality materials, completing the full Vantage package. For the late 1970s, 380 horsepower was an astonishing figure. The V8 Vantage could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in the 5-second range and reach a top speed of nearly 170 miles per hour. It was significantly faster than any American V8 at the time. Actually, it was faster than almost anything. In fact, in 1977, the Aston Martin V8 Vantage was the fastest production car in the world. But Aston Martin wasn't done yet. By 1986, the ultimate version of this legendary model arrived, the V8 Vantage X-Pack. Named after its 580X engine designation, this was the most powerful naturally aspirated V8 on the market. Featuring new Cosworth pistons, larger carburetors, increased intake port size, a revised intake manifold, and further upgraded camshafts, it now delivered a staggering 432 horsepower. With a 0 to 60 time in the low 5-second range and a top speed exceeding 170 miles per hour, the X-Pack represented the pinnacle of naturally aspirated V8 performance. It outpowered the Lamborghini Countach and the Ferrari Testarossa while offering far more practicality, 2 extra seats, and a luxurious interior. It was truly a jack-of-all-trades, and for once, Aston Martin had built a car that could outperform its European rivals in sheer performance. Of course, that level of engineering came at a cost, $120,000 in 1987 to be exact. But the real downside, only 137 X-Pack cars were ever built, making them incredibly rare. Today, spotting an original factory-built X-Pack is nearly impossible. Fortunately, Aston Martin Works still offers upgrades to transform classic V8s into X-Pack spec or even beyond, with a monstrous 6.3-litre, nearly 500 horsepower version of the legendary V8. So why did I want to cover this car in a video? Two reasons. First, because it is, without a doubt, my favorite looking car of all time. And second, because when you put this car into context, it really was just a muscle car in a suit. Now, some might disagree, but I mean that as a compliment. Yes, it's an Aston. It's elegant, expensive, and handcrafted, but at its core, it's a carbureted V8, a manual transmission, and rear-wheel drive. That's as classic muscle as it gets. Its design even looks like a more refined, sculpted version of a muscle car. So, is this Aston Martin the ultimate luxury muscle car, or is it just an overpriced alternative? Let me know in the comments below. That wraps up this video. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, enthusiasts.